with all due respect.
Hey, we're Josh Ortegon and Greg Gaines, and this is With All Due Respect, the show where we keep it real about health, fitness, and performance. From weight loss to sports development, we're covering the conversations that matter.
Follow us on Instagram at Phenom Fitness, PHNM Fitness, and visit www.phenomfit.com to check out our training programs, coaching, and gear built for real results. Let's get into it.
All right, thank you for watching this episode of Mike Boyle. With all due respect, Mike Boyle. I'm really glad. First off, I was shocked we had Mike on. He's super big in my industry, strength conditioning industry. I kind of went through this thing where I was like randomly hitting people up who wanted to talk on our podcast, thinking most would say no. And he's like, cool. So Mike Boyle is awesome to have on. Kind of controversial now, but for people in my business, I've spent 25 years and I first started getting educated reading Mike Boyle books and videos and stuff like that. So it's really awesome to have Mike Boyle on the show. Anything you remember stood out from this episode?
I mean, like the whole conversation stood out
Yeah.
to me because I think anyone who challenges the norm inside of fitness is obviously going to have a really large voice.
Mhm.
And for somebody to say like, oh, I don't like Jefferson curls and I don't like back squats, like that's a huge thing to say in the
Yeah.
fitness industry. And I just love like hearing his honest opinion about how he programs for athletes, and B, just hearing why he thinks the way that he does. I think it was really interesting to hear him talk about back squats and Jefferson curls and just so many other things in the strength and conditioning industry.
No, I agree. I agree. We hope you guys like this episode. Make sure you'll see down here below phenomfit.com. You can go watch our Patreon workout videos. We can do workout programs, coaching, consulting. All of that is in our website. Check us out, and we hope you enjoy the episode.
Thanks, y'all.
All right, guys. Josh and Gray again with all due respect. Today we have Mike Boyle on. Mike, thank you for coming on and taking the time. From Mike Boyle Strength Conditioning, most of my community is going to know who Mike is, whether it's from the books you've written, the speaking engagements. You started your facility. I looked it up. You started your facility in 1996. That was way before people were opening sports training centers, I feel.
I think we were the first one, to be perfectly honest. I think I don't know. There was some kind of weak franchising stuff going on. The For Peer thing was going on. I actually took over a For Peer acceleration
Oh, did you?
franchise. That's what I did. Yep, these guys that I knew had invested a lot of money in the For Peer system.
I didn't
And
know
my
that.
initial job was to kind of get them out of that hole. And one of the ways we did that was by selling For Peer back all his expensive proprietary equipment. But
Are they the ones that had like that skating?
yep, skating treadmill, high-speed treadmills.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had a plyo press thing that was kind of a big plate-loaded version of the MVP shuttle.
I know
But
exactly what you're talking about. Like the big jump, vertical jump thing.
yeah, like a jump leg press kind of
Yeah,
gadget.
I know exactly. I didn't know it. So that was that. So was that in the same building? Was that you just
That's where I took over that. We were in that space very, very briefly because one of the things they had located it poorly, and one of the things when I told them I would kind of partner with them, I said we've got to move it. We've got to find a better location. They were on one side of a highway where if you missed the exit to turn into the place, you had to drive about 4 miles because you had to go up a mile to the exit, get back off, get back on going southbound, go down and exit southbound, get back on. I mean, it was terrible. So we had a lot of things, but it was, yeah, it was. I don't know if there had been sort of a non-franchise, privately owned sports training facility prior to ours. I don't know of anybody, but there's a lot of things that I did that I don't know if other people did them before or if they didn't.
And from my understanding, Mike, you were in athletic training, right? Before that, what made you? And I owned a facility for 10 years, so this kind of makes me curious. What made you jump to be like, I just want to do a private center, get out of athletic training, or were you still practicing athletic training in
Well,
there?
it's funny. I only did athletic training for 1 year, and
Okay.
then I went into strength and conditioning. I quit my paid athletic training job in, I think, maybe 1983, and I became the volunteer strength coach. So I just went. I was basically a bartender who took over the weight room. That was really what happened. And because there was no strength coach, no one told me I couldn't do it. The kind of athletic department just sort of let me be a squatter in there. I just went in and said, I'm here, and I kind of put a chair in there and started coaching whoever showed up. And Boston University let me do that because they didn't have a strength coach. So,
I mean,
uh,
isn't that crazy to think that a major university, and they're very known for hockey, right? I had a client go there, a girl I trained years ago that went there. Jen Arms was her name, believe it or not, that played hockey at BU. Um, and to tell an athlete these days, oh yeah, a major university didn't have a strength coach in 1996.
yeah, no, this would have been 1984.
Okay, 84. Okay. Yeah.
84, and in 84 no one in New England had a strength coach. I was probably the first person to ever kind of say, hey, I'm a strength coach in 1984, and probably from 84 through probably to maybe to 90. I forget what year. Boston College, who actually had Division I football, did not have a full-time strength coach. They had an athletic trainer who was kind of dual rolling it. And I used to get a lot of BC football players for that reason because they didn't have a strength coach. And when they'd be getting ready to go to the combine or NFL tryouts or whatever, they would come and train with me because
Isn't
at Boston University, I think in 1990, they made it a paid position. So I actually went from being kind of a volunteer slash getting paid out of people's individual budgets to actually being an employee of the university.
isn't that crazy for somebody to hear this? That say an athlete's listening to this and they're 18 years old and they're going to go out to play and they're like, there was a time people didn't have strength coaches.
I tell people there was a time when we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have computers. I had somebody ask me on a podcast, they literally said,
Yeah.
been the biggest innovation during the course of your career? I was like, oh, the computer. And they
Yeah.
kind of like, what do you mean? And I was like, we had yellow legal pads and pencils. And we wrote, people mimeographed. Do you guys even remember what a mimeograph was?
Oh,
We had
cool.
secretaries
Not
who
me. I don't know what that is.
yeah, so a mimeograph was like it preceded the photocopier basically, but it was almost a handheld thing. Like you'd run copies and it would make these sort of blue copies that all smelled of this mimeograph fluid, and they would print out rosters that way. But people, they were typing. Imagine asking the secretary to school, I need a typed copy of that roster, and then I'm going to mimeograph it and I'm going to write the results in with
Yeah.
a pencil.
When you
Right.
look,
I
then go ahead, Gray.
I'm curious because I feel like we just jumped around so many times. How, I guess maybe even what made you qualified to go and teach people strength? Like what led you to that point? Did you do it for
Well,
yourself
it's funny.
personally? Did you coach?
I started, as I said, I started as an athletic trainer,
Right.
but when I was in school, I had gotten into competitive powerlifting.
Okay.
So,
There's the link.
that was probably what qualified me. But I was also super lucky in terms of when I was at Springfield College. So my mentor, who was my dorm director when I showed up, ended up being the longest tenured guy in the history of the National Football League, Mike Boysick, who was in Mike actually, at one point, Mike had more Super Bowl rings than Tom Brady. Mike had 6 when Brady tied Mike Boysick and then eventually went one ahead of Mike Boysick. But that was my dorm director. He was the field event
Wow.
coach. He coached the throwers at Springfield College. The second longest tenured guy in the NFL was a guy named Rusty Jones, who was primarily with Buffalo, but then with Buffalo, Indianapolis. He was a graduate assistant football coach when I was there. So there was a lot of people there who were going to go into strength and conditioning. None of us knew it at the time. We just all kind of knew like, wow, stuff's happening and things are changing. And I remember I talked to Mike maybe 3 months ago and I asked what I remember he left Springfield and he got a job at Syracuse University and he was the part-time strength coach and the track field event coach. And he said, the only reason I got that job, he said, is no one else wanted it. No one wanted a $25,000 a year job or a $20,000 a year job, whatever it was at that time, where they were basically going to have two full-time jobs, where someone was going to expect you to be the strength coach for the football team and then also be the field event coach for the track team.
High schools don't even have that anymore. I'm a full-time at a high school. I don't do anything else but strength and conditioning at a high school. High schools don't have dual role people anymore.
Right.
Right. And it's crazy to think that like at the university level, you're the track coach, but where were you guys then getting your education from? Where were you guys learning? Because now we're overeducated, right? I mean, it's everywhere. You Google, search, books, speakers, all of that. In the late 80s,
Ray's,
early
Ray's
90s.
going to laugh again because you know where we got it?
Right.
Primarily muscle
Right.
magazines.
Sure. Okay.
Iron Man, Strength and Health.
Yeah.
And even a little bit of Muscle and Fitness. So Muscle and Fitness, even at that time, was a little bit cheesy. But Iron Man and Strength and Health had some really smart guys who were writing at that point in time.
Okay.
But I can remember, same thing, you talk about generationally, I can remember waiting for the muscle magazines to come out. I can remember going to the newsstand and being like, is the new Strength and Health here yet? Is the new Iron Man here yet? Because I knew that would be where the best information that I could get would come from. What I got introduced to, though, Mike Wojcik, when I was in college at Springfield, he was reading Soviet Sport Review, which would then become the Yeses journals.
Yeah.
So Mike initially started exposing us to concepts like Mike was doing. We're talking about, he had our guys doing plyometric exercises in 1978 at Springfield College.
Where was he
Almost,
getting that from? From the Russian journals and Yeses and
yep. And from just, track and field, kind of the grapevine, right? He had been a thrower at Boston College, so he held the records at Boston College for a long time in like the shot and discus. And a lot of it was just like me. Everybody was curious about kind of how to train themselves, how to get stronger or whatever. And then I don't think any of us were initially thinking about applying it to anybody else.
mm-hmm.
But I started coaching almost right away. I got fascinated with the coaching part, and I started coaching other powerlifters. There's a kid in my area, kind of in my geographical area, that I saw had won the teenage nationals in powerlifting as a 14-year-old. And I literally started going around from gym to gym trying to find this kid. I was like, I'm going to find this kid and I'm going to start training with him.
Yeah.
And I remember I walked in, I'm from a town called Malden, Massachusetts, which is a little bit north of Boston. At the Melrose Y, the next town over, had kind of a strength group. Like they were mostly actually bench press guys, because that was kind of what was big at that point in time, were bench press contests as opposed to powerlifting. And I was like, I gotta go check out the Melrose Y. And I can remember I walk in and there's this little wiry guy, looks like he's 14, 15 years old, and he's deadlifting 405 for five. He rips off 5 reps at 405. And I'm like, that's Howie Hoffman right there. And I walked up to him and I introduced myself. And he was like, how did you know it was me? I said, I just knew. I said, there was nobody your size, nobody your age who was going to be moving the kind of weights that you had moved. And he won, I think, 3 teenage nationals in a row, like 14, 15, 16. And I just used to go train with him. So I was like your classic. I was everything that I rail against right now. You're kind of.
Yeah, I got my start in Olympic lifting. And in the strength and conditioning program we're in right now, we don't even do any Olympic lifting. We don't lift.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, like we don't straight bar deadlift, we don't back squat. The only thing we do from a powerlifting perspective is we still bench press.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, we still bench press because I think the kids would revolt.
Yeah. Yeah.
They need it.
Nobody ever realized. It's funny, when I first started to tell my NFL guys that they would never have to squat again, I can remember getting like hugs and high fives, and guys were like, Mike, you're the man. That's the best thing anybody's ever said to me. Because they had been just abused by these other strength coaches, forced to do things that a lot of times, I always say, like, if you watch 100 people squat, 80 of them aren't good at it.
Sure.
80 of them will not be physically, dimensionally created to do that lift well. Like, I was one of those people. I can still squat to this day. I was always a good squatter. Because I am 5'10" and segmentally very evenly proportioned.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not most of the world, and it's really not most of the sports world, especially when you get into basketball, or you get into football, and you start getting into taller guys and longer femurs, and you just get, we spent so much time trying. I mean, I used to talk about this all the time, but we were hitting square pegs into round holes with a hammer. I mean, we just were trying so hard to make squatters out of guys. I can, like, I think of some of the kids now, and I just should send out all these apology letters to guys for the things I made them do when they were in college.
Yeah.
But I didn't know any better, honestly. I thought I knew, and I thought I was doing it better than a lot of other people were. But I look at it now and think, I mean, the one thing, and I say this over and over again, but I am where I am and doing what I'm doing because of the experiences that I had, be
Sure.
they positive or negative. And a lot of it was negative experiences with things that were really popular, like squatting, back squatting. People always, well, why don't you squat? I said, because we could literally correlate all of our back pain to back squat. Nothing else. If you talk to our athletes, our football players who had back pain, every single guy would tell you the thing that bothered his back was the back squat. If we cleaned, it didn't bother him. If we front squatted, it didn't bother him. If we belt squatted, it didn't bother him. When we back squatted, it bothered him. And after a while, I got to the point where I thought, wow, there's really only one kind of major offending lift that we're dealing with all the time. Why don't we try to remove that? Because can you think, right? I mean, in any other field, the logic would be flawless. Because if you said to somebody, oh, I figured out how everybody's getting injured and we're going to eliminate that, everybody would say, oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Except in strength and conditioning, where you say, we're going to tell people not to squat. And
Yeah.
then suddenly all hell breaks loose. Like,
Blasphemer.
yes.
I saw that on Josh's list of questions when he sent it over to me, and I was like, no, back squatting, like that would send me up
Yeah.
into arms because I
Yeah.
love to back
Yeah.
squat. But I agree with you, Mike. Like I'm pretty proportional. It's pretty easy for me to get into a deep squat. But hearing you talk about it in a way of like it bothers most people and it bothers most athletes, like it's very interesting. It's kind of like changing how I feel about a back
I
squat.
watched the coach yesterday. I was in a facility. I watched the coach squat yesterday, and I thought, that is so ugly.
Mhm.
That was all I could think about. And I just thought, that just is ugly. And I see it all the time. You watch whether it's on Twitter or on Instagram, and you just sometimes think, that is so ugly. That is not what we intended the exercise to do.
When was
Right.
it you actually went, I'm done. We're not squatting. We're going all single leg,
I
bilateral.
think it was 2009.
Okay.
Okay, that's a
About,
long time.
Yeah.
yeah. In
So you
2009.
still coached the squat for a long time. Like you went
Oh,
20
yeah.
years coaching, oh, we got a squat. And then all of a
Yep.
sudden, 2009, you're like, bilateral work.
I remember that one of my graduate assistants at that time, who's now Jeff Oliver, he's been in Holy Cross for at least maybe 30 years. But I remember him saying to me one time, if we could figure out a way to test single leg strength, would you stop squatting? And I was like, yeah, I think I would. I think I'm at that. I think I'm at the break point of, as long as I can figure out a lower body strength test that I think is relevant, then I think I could walk away and be fine. And so that's when we started playing around with some split squat tests and rear foot elevated split squat tests and some of that stuff. And the data, and this is where the good thing is, I mean, and this is what people don't do. It leads you places that you didn't know you were going to go. So it leads you to ideas like bilateral deficit. Because one of the things that we found is that we started doing back split squats, had real heavy back split squats.
Okay.
And at that time, we were still front squatting. So I had my hockey guys. This was probably 2005 or six. And I tested them all in the back split squat and in the front squat. And back split squat, I did like a predicted rep max. I just took whatever number they did. If they did 280 for 5, I predicted that out at like 310, whatever the chart would tell you it was. Every single guy could split squat what he could front squat. Every single one, right down the line. 25 guys, 25 guys were split squatting and front squatting the same weights. And then people say, oh, that's because they're using their back leg, blah, blah, blah. Like, it doesn't matter. We're doing a one leg exercise, and they can do exactly what they could do in the two leg exercise. That to me was kind of like, whoa, I got to think about this a little bit more. Then I start getting into this idea of bilateral deficit. See, my whole thing now is I firmly believe that we are not neurologically geared to bilateral exercise. It's foreign to the system because we don't do it.
Right.
The only time we do it is strength training. We force people into these bilateral situations. But, if you say to anybody, jump as high as you can, everybody, if you're right-handed, you are going to run and jump off your left leg and reach up with your right hand. I don't have to tell you to do that. You're going to automatically do that. Right? Because neurologically the way your body works. I don't have to instruct you. Very few people, if you said jump up and touch the rim, would walk up to the rim, stand underneath it, and try to do a double leg squat, jump up and touch the rim. And generally, the person who did that would probably be a very unathletic person.
Mm.
The most athletic person is going to, how much run up do I get, right? And they're all going to go off the leg opposite their dominant hand. Everybody, right? No one, no one who's athletic would try to jump off their right leg and reach with their right hand. Like we know how to throw, we know how to do all these things that are complex neurological tasks, and they're all unilateral and diagonal. And then in strength and conditioning, somehow we are like bilaterally neutral all the time. I think honestly, I've come to the conclusion, I think we make people worse athletes at a certain point in time. Like if you're a powerlifting West Side, you're going to do, heavy box squats and heavy deadlifts and all this stuff. Your people are going to get less athletic over time. And your good athletes will tell you that they're feeling less athletic. And we used to say stuff like, oh, they're soft, they don't want to work. And I was kind of like, then I started realizing, well, why do all of these like super neural guys that I have, the guys who are the best athletes in the world at their position, they didn't like bilateral spinal loading at all. They were like, cats. I would say they're like cats in water. Like you throw a cat in the water, it's like, they don't want to be there. You put a big heavy bar on a really good wide receiver's back, and they just look at you like why are you doing this to me? Like you're literally crushing my nervous system.
Mm.
And then, but you think like who likes that stuff? Linemen, right? People with shitty nervous systems. That's why they're linemen. If they had good nervous systems, they wouldn't be
Maybe
linemen.
that's why I like a back squat.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's why I did too. I mean, I was never like the world's greatest athlete, but I was really good. I was good at lifting heavy stuff with two legs.
Yeah.
I wasn't necessarily great at running fast or jumping high relative to how good I was at lifting with two legs. So I just think we don't think enough, and we are too steeped in convention. We think, okay, it's like Grace said it perfectly. I like to do that, right? There's so many people, it's like you were raised on this, and it's such a huge part of your belief system that it's hard to take that next step and to look and think. And that's the advantage. Because I've had the world's greatest athletes in just about every single sport known to man. Olympic medalists, huge contract pros, whatever it was. And one of the things you realize is that none of them were great weightlifters. Not one. And some of them were really bad weightlifters. But none of them were great. But a lot of the grunts, the linemen, some of those people were great weightlifters.
Yeah, they're big dudes. But it makes total sense because like we always encourage people in a weightlifting setting. Of course, like you want to be strong and do the lifts that you like, but at the same time, you're training for everyday life or you're training for your everyday sport. And you're right. I'm sitting here thinking like, if I go bend down to pick up the groceries, I'm not picking them up with two hands. I'm normally bending down on one side and picking them up on one side. So that's training unilaterally in everyday life.
Exactly.
Do you think?
Oh, go ahead.
Do you think, as strength coaches, that sometimes because we loved lifting and we loved seeing squats and we loved seeing people do a heavy clean, or we loved this about lifting, and then we find these kids and they're really strong and we're really impressed by their strength, that we try to like infuse some of our own desires of like, just because a kid's 200 pounds and he can back squat 550 doesn't mean we need to be watching this kid back squat 550 all the time. But sometimes coaches are like, look how cool that is. It's cool. Like, how much do you think this kid can do 600? Right.
Social media promo video for football teams.
Yeah, I guess. Do you think sometimes we just kind of infuse like
absolutely. There's no question in my mind. That's absolutely what we do. We don't look at it. And that's why it's really funny. Have you ever read Rants of a Strength and Conditioning Madman?
No, I have not.
You have to read it. Kurt Hester's book.
Yes, I know who Kurt Hester is. Yep.
Kurt sadly was just diagnosed with cancer. I'm thinking about him all the time.
I saw that on Twitter. Yep.
It's his book. One of the things he talks about is in the book, he makes some reference to the idea, Magnus, the strength coach, basically, can't get out of the way of an oncoming bus, right? He can't demonstrate any movement exercises, but he can lift a shitload of weight. Like go to the CSCCA or the NSCA football coaches conference, and it looks like a dinosaur convention. and these guys, they love to go down into the, we're going to go down into the exhibit room, we're going to lift, and we're going to show everybody how strong we are. And I look at it, like, I'm looking at it thinking, if I'm hiring coaches now, I want athletes.
Yeah.
I do not want lifters. If you're a lifter, if I get a resume from someone who's a lifter, I tend to shy away from that now. If someone said, "Oh, my hobby is bodybuilding or Olympic lifting or powerlifting," we have found those people don't make good coaches because they tend to be very into themselves and into what they're doing and not necessarily really into the coaching part. They're the kind of person who goes, "Oh, I went into this because I really like to work out." And there's a lot of people in our field that are that way. The strength coach, right? When I started, the strength coach was a guy who was good in the weight room as a football player. And then they said, "Oh, you're going to be the strength coach because you were really good in the weight room." And then suddenly that guy becomes the strength coach because, well, you like the weight room. So we'll put you in the weight room with all the guys. And what do? You tell everybody, I call them the beer and ice cream coaches, right? I like beer and ice cream. But if you ask me about nutrition, I wouldn't say beer and ice cream.
Yeah.
But as strength coaches, that's a lot of times what we do. Like, you can watch people and see, okay, this guy's a bodybuilder, or this guy's a powerlifter, this guy's a West Side guy, this guy's a Poliquin guy, this guy's an Olympic lifting guy, and it's just beer and ice cream, right? It's just you're giving everybody what you like.
Wow.
And
Yeah. I never thought about it that way.
you're not looking at it and thinking, um, now, like for us, we're much more sprint oriented, speed oriented, power oriented. I mean, if someone, I always said, I'd much rather my kids run faster and jump higher. I want them to get stronger, but if it doesn't drive them running faster and jumping higher, then I'm probably not that interested in what the result is, because sometimes we just spend a lot of time getting better at being in the weight room and then hoping that that's going to drive all these other quantities.
I have a friend of mine, years ago, he was on a strength conditioning staff in college. And they were looking at ways of trying to improve. Well, how, and the administration, right? Always when administration gets involved in strength coaching, it starts like, it's never good, right? I've never been in a good environment where the guy that's holding you accountable is an administrator in the weight room, right? They were trying to find, well, how do we know our strength and conditioning staff is good? So one of the ways they came up with it was, we're going to do strength testing, and we need to see a certain percentage of improvement in strength in every kid that comes through, so we know they're getting better. And my question to him was, that's the law of diminishing returns. So that means all you got to do to be considered good at your job is to make kids stronger. Well, how do we know that that's exactly what's going to make them better on the field?
Right. And you start teaching to the test, right? You start worrying
Yeah.
about, okay. Because I used to always say, the more I teach you about powerlifting, probably the stronger I can make you.
Mhm.
So the more I teach you about stance and about lowering the bar, the better I can probably make your squat. The more I teach you about arch and about the technical aspects of bench pressing, probably the better I can make your bench press. But I'm not making you stronger. I'm teaching you the nuances of the lift. And that's why I always think, I'd say, hey, if you want to evaluate it based on injuries. That's where I think you can see if your strength and conditioning program is good or bad, because I've been able to do that over multiple year periods in organizations. Like when I worked for the Bruins. This is what same thing. I worked for the Boston Bruins in the 90s. While I was the strength coach at BU, I was also the strength coach for the Bruins, because the NHL wasn't hiring full-time strength coaches. BU wasn't paying me a whole lot of money, but they would let me leave and work with the Bruins guys in the morning as long as I was there. So I was at BU 7 hours a day. I was there 12 to 7, kind of, no lunch, no break.
Yeah.
But then I could go, and so I'd work 8:30 to 11 or 11:30 with the Bruins, and then drive over to BU and open the weight room. But you start looking at that and thinking, when the first year I worked for the Bruins, we set the record where, for NHL statistic that they use, is called man games lost to injury. We set the modern day record for man games lost to injury. I think it was almost 900 games, which is just insane when you think a good year now in the NHL is probably in the low hundreds. We were 900. Like, every guy in our minor league team played, I think, at least one NHL game, which means almost everybody on our NHL roster at some point was injured and missed games. And We had some incredible bad luck stuff that happened. We had 3 guys get hit by shots and break bones that kept them out for 40, 50 games, but it didn't matter but by the 9th year that I was there, we were the second lowest in the league. We were down under 150. I think we were like 120, down from 900. Like I could look at that and think, okay, if I'm trying to measure success, then I think we were successful. I went to work for the Red Sox for 2 years. The first year I was with the Red Sox, we had 11 guys because they use disabled list games. That's the Major League Baseball statistic. But we started the season with 11 of our 40-man roster on the disabled list. So 25% of our players were on the disabled list coming back from postseason surgery. The second year, zero. Zero, not one postseason surgery. No guys in the disabled list start the next season. And that next season, we won the World Series.
What year was that?
2013.
Oh, so you were
I was the Red Sox strength and conditioning coach in 2012 and 2013. Yeah.
Like they write stories about that team.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
He said, yeah.
Yeah, I did not know that.
Yep.
Yeah, I've always been a firm believer that you got to find a way to get your best players on the field.
Right. And that's exactly, if you look statistically, you'll see NFL uses starters games missed. That's their stat.
Yeah.
And usually the team that is lowest in starters games missed, those teams usually end up doing well, making the playoffs, probably get, going reasonably far. Anytime you look at the injury statistics, same thing, man games lost in the NHL or, disabled list games in baseball, the healthier teams tend to do better. That shouldn't be, whatever. It shouldn't be anything profound, but that is really probably, I think, the way you measure the effectiveness, because your strength and conditioning program, I think, is way more than that. People get it all up in arms when you say injury prevention, whatever, injury prevention, injury reduction. Yes, I know I don't prevent injuries. I get it.
Yeah.
People get hurt, but in either case, if the better job you do, the more healthy people there are. And the more healthy people there are, generally, if you've got good players, the more games you win. So it's a pretty logical progression.
Yeah, I've heard the two things I've heard people say, and it's common in baseball, is you can't make the club in the tub, and don't break the toys.
Yeah.
And they're highly, highly, highly skilled athletes. I'd rather them get hurt don't let them get hurt in the weight room.
I say the best ability is availability.
Right. So like when you think about a strong program, do you think maybe the issue now with a lot of programs, or maybe even not now, it might not even be like a new thing, it might just be something through the decades. Do you think the issue is there's too much focus on building the strongest athlete possible and not the most resilient athlete possible?
Absolutely. I think there are things like I watch people do box squats and I literally want to tear my hair out, because I look at that and think I think of it, I said, there's nothing dumber that you can do than put your spine in between two immovable objects. I don't think. I would look at it and think, in strength and conditioning, if you said, name the dumbest thing that you could do, I would be like, maybe Jefferson Curl would be ahead of box squat, but there wouldn't be much that would be ahead of box squat in terms of the level of stupidity. And yet people would be like, what are you talking about? It builds this, it builds that. I'm like, your spine was not meant to be placed between a huge load and a wooden box. That's just not. And I would say to people, if I said, put your hand on the table, boom, and I'm going to pile 500 pounds on your hand, would you think that was a good idea? And people would be like, no, why would I let you pile 500 pounds on my hand? I'm like, why would I let you do it on your spine? Your spine's way more sensitive than your hand, right? It's much more vital to your function, right? It's innervating all of your internal organs and all there's a lot more stuff going on in your spine than in your hand. But people have no problem because, again, it's just generally accepted. And people will say, the guys at Westside have been doing it forever. And I'm like,
their job is to squat, though. They're
right, exactly. And they're powerlifters. That they're only, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're healthy, right? It just, you look and you hear these guys all the time. You talk to people, and guys are talking about their injuries and their problems, and it's like, It's like when you said, great, you want people to be healthy. So I look at the program and think, even like start at the beginning. What does the warm up look like, right? Do you, if people just walk in your weight room and start lifting right away, that's a huge red flag for me. For us, and I always talk about the idea that we're very recipe oriented. So everybody that trains with us does the same thing.
Okay.
Everybody that comes in foam rolls. Like you come in, someone's going to expect you to get a foam roller and start rolling. And then you're going to, then you're going to static stretch, and then you're going to do some mobility work, and then you're going to do some sort of dynamic warm up, and then you're going to do plyos and med ball work, and then you're going to do sprints. And then, and only at the end of that, are you going to actually get to lift weights. You will have had to have completed roughly 25 minutes worth of something very specific before you get to touch a weight.
Mm.
And like for us, that's normal. No, but if someone in our gym, it just kind of walked in off the street and just started lifting, everybody would be like, what the hell are they doing? But we live in a bubble. There are other places where that's standard. People just walk in the weight room and whatever, walk up to a bench or walk up to a squat rack and start lifting.
What's
But
your logic on the Jefferson curl? I'm interested.
it's the same thing. I mean, your spine isn't made to do that, right? And people always say, and that's what the dummies are always like, oh, your spine's supposed to be able to move. It's supposed to be able to do that. I'm like, it's supposed to be able to move. I get that part. But it's not supposed to be able to move into flexion under load. There's no requirement. And then people will always say, what about jujitsu? And I'm like, okay, so maybe there's one sport where it might actually make sense for you to be able to load your spine in flexion under load. But because there's a provision for one sport doesn't mean there's a provision for 100.
Mhm.
If you think most people's problems are flexion related, when you think about back pain, you think about the average person. Why do they have trouble with their back? Because they're living in flexion.
Yeah.
Why would we promote that person going into flexion or think that strengthening them kind of from flexion to extension would be beneficial? I look at that sometimes and think, because I always want people to kind of give me the logic. What's supposed to be happening there? Like you said, picking up, I'm going to pick up whatever my groceries off the ground, right? And I'm going to reach down and they're probably going to be to my right or my left, and I'm going to grab them with two hands and I'm going to pick them up. But no one ever said like, hey, Gray, can you pick up your groceries with your legs completely straight and just flex
And
from your weight?
off the top stair.
Yeah, maybe off two stairs below, right?
Yeah.
And look, and you like, again, that's what I started talking about when I wrote functional training for sports, is if you kind of logic test stuff and say, when do we think these things would ever actually happen? It starts to put it in a different perspective. Because people, when I started saying no back squats, a lot of the people, like the old YouTube stuff, people be like, you got to be able to get down and up the toilet. And I'm like, I'm not saying you shouldn't squat or you shouldn't be able to squat. What I am saying is that you will probably never sit on the toilet with someone on your back, right? You're never going to piggyback someone into the bathroom with you and then think, oh, I got to go to the bathroom right now. Can
We
you
got
just
deeper issues if you
yeah,
do.
can you just stay on there while I do? Right, exactly. I mean, it's completely, you're laughing because it's completely illogical. But
Yeah.
yet people they'll search for the illogical argument to defend their point because they don't have a
Good
logical.
point. Yeah. Yeah. No, it makes me think about I personally again like love a Jefferson curl like I love a back squat, but it feels good to me. So I was curious about it.
It's interesting, Mike. I remember when that content started coming out and you started saying no back squats. And people were basically almost like Mike has dementia. Oh, Mike lost his mind. Like, well, it was nice knowing Mike Boyle while he was here. He's lost his mind. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, it was
absolutely.
great. It was, you would have thought Mike ran away with people's wives.
No, like I firmly believe it because I think in any person that doesn't know what you do or any person that does know what you do and still heard that, they'd be like, what is this guy on?
Yeah.
I mean, I thought that when I saw that in the email question, I said, he said what?
Yeah, other people have come to the same conclusion.
Sure.
Lots of other people, but
Yeah.
and it's and one of the things that I said, because we realized, especially like I said with this bilateral deficit idea, like we started looking at like our guys. I had um one of our hockey players Charlie Coyle, who plays for the Colorado Avalanche now, so we did a rear foot elevated split squat test, and he did 240 for 20. He had the 120 dumbbells. That was the heaviest dumbbells that we had. And he did 20 reps on each leg. And
My gosh.
we told him that, we said, just do as many as you can. And we're going to stop at 20. And he like just kept grinding until he got 20 with each leg. But I started to look at that and think, okay, and this is where, you go to sort of your whatever common sense mind and thought 240 for 20 and whatever. Now we know that the contribution is kind of 70-30, like there could be 30% of the force coming from the back leg. But no matter how you do the math, like you look at a guy like Charlie and you think he's not doing 480 for 20, in a conventional back squat, right?
Right.
That's not happening. And then what you realize is that what we saw from comparing squatting and split squatting is that in squatting, your back is what gives up. So if you go to a powerlifting meet and you watch people fail in the squat, it is very, very rare that you see like a really good bolt upright squat, kind of Olympic style squat where the person loses it and you think, oh, they just didn't have enough leg drive to get it up there. They invariably they buck their ass up and they're kind of trying to good morning it up. And if they fail, it fails forward. Okay. Right. And people are like diving out from under the bar. And we know that. And so what you realize is that it wasn't really a leg failure. It was a failure of their back to transfer the load to the bar, because what gave out wasn't their legs. And then we started to see that when we started doing these split squat tests, we were like, man, these people there's a lot of juice left in their legs when we don't make the back the limiting factor. When we suddenly say, hey, you're only like in Charlie's case, he's only got 240 pounds. His back never gave out. Like he never buckled from holding the load. Like we would have guys, sometimes guys would drop the dumbbells.
Yeah, it was grip strength.
Their grip would give out. Their back never gave out.
Yeah.
And what eventually gave, their legs, they just got to the point where they couldn't do another rep, and they were so sore, like, because it was kind of dumb what we were doing anyway. But guys, when we did this test, they were cripplingly sore because of
that's an immense load.
Yeah. Yeah. But when you look at that and you kind of look at the big picture, you think, wow, this is why, right? Now, again, remember, think old time bodybuilders. What would they do? They'd squat, and then when they really wanted to fatigue their legs out, they'd go and jump on the leg press. Why would they jump on the leg press?
No back, all legs.
Take their back out. Because they knew guys like, oh, I got a lot of juice left in my legs here. I can get a lot more reps done. Like they knew it intuitively. And then when they were done with leg press, they'd go and they'd get on the leg extension machine because they knew they still had more left in there.
So are you doing no bilateral work, or are you doing front squats? Are you doing a trap?
Trap bar deadlift is the only bilateral thing we really do. Okay. We still hang clean with a lot of our younger kids. I love hang clean. So we'll still teach that. So I would look at that as kind of a bilateral lift, but it's more of a power exercise. So it's almost not really in kind of the strength category. But trap bar deadlift, as long as people don't have back issues, and then if people start to show a little bit of back wear and tear, then we'll eliminate that and we'll go like some of our older professional athletes are 100% unilateral. They never do anything bilateral at all.
I can see that, especially with hockey players or football players, because they're already under so much spinal compression in their sport, all the high impact, high spinal compression, high impact. To add more of that, I can see, especially as they age, you're like, well, why do I make them want to hurt more?
Right. Exactly. That's exactly what happens is you start as guys age. Like young people, you can do pretty much anything and they're really good. I always kind of say the analogy I use is, we start out as filet mignon and we end up as beef jerky, and so when you start to move, like I'm firmly in the beef jerky stage of life. Yeah. Like I don't have really good tissue quality anymore. And if I was to try to lift, like even for me, if we go out and we move furniture or we try to move a refrigerator or whatever it is, I can pick it up. But I pay for it the next day, and I pay for it all in my connective tissue. Like I'll get up and just be like, oh my God, like I feel awful. My back hurts. But young kids don't get that. Or when they do a day later, they look at, like I used to look at kids, oh, I just, this hurts, that hurts. And they come in the next day and like, oh, I'm fine. I'd be hurt for like 6 months if I did what you did.
I got kids that could rear elevated front squat 5 days a week and never be completely fine on Saturday. I would be in the hospital.
Right.
Right. I think it was you too, Mike, and I'm misquoting. I believe you actually talked about the benefit of doing the clean to the catch. You heard a lot of people say, oh, the only benefit of the clean is the extension and the high pull. And I think it was you, and I think this actually one of the things you said that actually changed my training with kids. You talked about the impact of learning to catch the weight, I believe. Was that you? The impact of learning how to mimic so many sports, from being able to football to hit, hockey to hit, pushing.
Like, I think that's the biggest. When you get a kid who can catch 300 pounds on his shoulders, that kid's probably not going to get hurt in a collision, truthfully.
Yeah.
Because that person has learned to manage load and to absorb load. And they're going to be much more resilient, I think, than someone who just high pulls it and drops it on the ground. Like, there's definitely a difference. And people will argue that, but it's when you start thinking about that eccentric ability to move around the bar and then boom, kind of
I think it
stick it.
makes you less fearful too, because you
Oh,
know
no
that you
question.
have that much weight coming
Yeah.
up to your shoulders, and it makes you look like a person. Like that's no big deal, you know,
And
with
yeah,
that
and,
collision.
and I always think it's one of the thing I always liked about hang clean, even as a college strength coach, was that it was the great equalizer in terms of our skill position kids could hang clean as well as our linemen. So we would routinely have skill position guys that would be, in our top 10 in the hang clean because they were just so athletic and so fast and they moved around the bar so well. Whereas they would never squat or bench press what our linemen could bench press, but it would not be unusual to see them hang clean the same or more. Like I had a couple of wide receivers who were like, literally 340 hang cleans at 180 pounds. I mean, they would have been real good Olympic lifters had they decided they were going to pursue Olympic lifting. And I'd have 300-pound linemen who couldn't clean 340 pounds because they just didn't have the the kind of neural ability and the athleticism that these skill position guys had.
Yeah.
So that was one thing you said in your past that I read, that it was like one of these little comments in those years ago that you're like, I kind of like catching the clean from an impact absorption perspective. And logically in my brain, I went, because I used to be the guy that's like, oh, I used to tell kids, oh, the catch is more because I think it looks pretty. I'm more interested in the pull and the extension. And then when you said that one day, I was like, oh, logically in my brain, that makes sense. That you're learning to catch and absorb weight. Because if you go out and put the football pads on or go put the hockey pads on and you haven't done that, and you haven't learned to absorb weight and catch weight and take like a weight into your body and absorb it, that can be pretty shocking the first time you do it if you're playing sports.
Yeah, no question. That's what I said.
Yeah.
I used to argue with people all the time about the kind of anti-Olympic lifting people, or the people who were even people who don't like people who I used to like. I didn't let our guys drop the bar, and I didn't let our guys drop the bar because we were on the second floor, and the people on the first floor didn't like us dropping the bar. But I also got to the point where I really liked that guys could manage the weight. So if I had someone, if they could, when they could hang clean 300 pounds for 5 reps, they could catch it and kind of get themselves unraveled, get back to the start position, do it again. Like, those people tended to be really athletic and really resilient. There was a direct correlation for us in athleticism with the hang clean that there was not in other things in the weight room. So we would look at bench press or squat or things like that, and there was no correlation. But all the time, our best lineman, at every position, usually our best player at that position was also the leader in that position in the hang clean. It would be really rare that it wasn't the case.
And some of that just neural too, like they just learned how to apply force fast.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we had kids. I've had 2 documented cases of people increasing their vertical jump by a foot. And both of them I would attribute to hang clean. We had a defensive lineman that I still remember who he was a 20-inch vertical jump when he got there. He was not explosive at all. He ended up at like a 370 hang clean as a senior and a 32-inch vertical jump.
That's incredible.
That is incredible. And I was going to say that's a huge piece of it too, because I used to firmly believe that like slow training was the only way that you should train. I'm not an athlete anymore, but I can tell you just from starting CrossFit, because I started CrossFit last year, explosion training makes me think so much harder than doing something that's slow.
Yeah.
Like I have to be so mindful of every piece of that explosive training.
Well, one thing I think, so Mike, I feel like you gained popularity right around the time that like the functional thing came out, right?
Mhm.
Like everybody started talking about functional training, and like I can't remember who it was, but they put out like the functional training med ball video, functional med ball training video, and it blew up right around the time I got into strength conditioning, which was I graduated college and went. I was at IMG Academies in 2001, and functional was like the thing. And then every sudden, people took functional to we got a squat on a physio ball. No, that's not what like we all took it like a little too far, right?
Yep.
Doing like Paul check exercises, things type stuff. And then all of a sudden, people started getting platforms and doing Olympic, and all of a sudden they put in monoliths on top of their oh, we got to go to the West Side Power lift. And I feel like the industry gets so uh polarized, right? And I remember somebody was like, Santana,
Could have been.
might have been Santana. He said, I went to a clinic and he said, I wrote all this stuff about the med ball and the functional work because that's what I felt the industry was missing. Somewhere along the line, they forgot that I still like to lift weights too. Like we're still trap bar deadlifting, front squatting, doing Olympic lifts. We just put the other stuff in there too because I felt that's what the industry was missing. And I think when you came around too and you're doing like the functional stuff, people thought all you were doing was doing 3-pound med ball throws and box jumps and single leg toe touches. And I'm like, no, they're lifting too.
Right. And that's people at that stage, particularly early on. It's really funny. 'Cause it's an interesting story because so probably I think I wrote functional training for sports in 2004. So probably somewhere around 2002, I got an email, or not. I didn't get an email. I probably got a phone call, truthfully, because I don't even know if I had email at that point. But either way, someone from Human Kinetics contacted me. I could have got a letter actually.
Yeah.
Think about that. But and said, we want you to write a book called Functional Training for Sports. We think you would be the ideal author for this book. I got in touch with the guy, Ed Burke, I think was his name. He was what they called an acquisitions editor, and his job was to go out and basically find people to write books. And I said, really flattering. I said, I don't even know what functional training is, so I don't think I'm the right guy to write the book. And his response was, well, we've been following your writings and we think what you're doing is functional training. And I said, so I can write a book on our training program, but Human Kinetics is going to sell it under the title Functional Training for Sports. And he said, yeah, basically that's what the plan is. You would just write a book about how you train, and then we would call it Functional Training for Sports and market it for you. And I thought, oh, I could probably do that as long as
That's
I
a
was just
incredible story.
yeah, and because they didn't have any expectation at all in terms of whether it was, medicine balls or stability balls or, one leg or two legs or whatever it was. They had just been reading. I had been doing some writing and they had read the articles that I had written. And they said basically the way that I was looking at things in terms of whatever progressions and regressions and unilateral and hip dominant and knee dominant and all these things, they said, okay, this is what makes up functional training. And I started that's why now I'm still trying to explain to people that I think functional training is simply applying the idea of functional anatomy to training. So if we start looking and saying, all right, we'll just pick a muscle. What does that muscle do? So if we said glute medius is a stabilizer in single leg stance, that's its big function. So if I want to train the glute medius according to its function, I need to be in single leg stance because it's a single leg stance stabilizer. On the opposite side, my quadratus lumborum is a single leg stance stabilizer. When I'm in bilateral stance, neither of those muscles is doing a lot of what they would do in a moving situation if I'm running or if I'm jumping.
Yeah.
And that was how we started to look at things. And then we started to realize that a lot of, and at that time I had just been introduced to Gary Gray.
Yep.
And so my thought process was changing in the sense that what Gary had said, because we were talking about rehab, and rehab then had been, like you said, as it is going back to now, very single joint oriented, leg extension, leg curl, calf raise, leg press. Just and Gary's thing was, you need to be standing because what we're worried about is gravity.
Okay.
And so by having people in standing. And he said, basically all the muscles only do, he said, from a functional anatomical standpoint, he said, there's only two things that we can do. We can control flexion, we can initiate extension. If I'm standing on my right leg, all the muscles on the right side of my body are acting to control flexion.
Mhm.
They're stopping me from falling down, right?
Yeah,
My
yeah, yeah.
quads,
Right.
you know, like, you know what I mean? If I jump and land, whatever, if I run, if I could do a step up, whatever it is, he said, when you push, they all create extension.
Mhm.
So when you suddenly start to look at the view of anatomy differently and say, well, wait a second, isn't the quadricep a knee extensor? And you start to realize, well, no, not really. That's how they teach it to you in the book to make it make sense. You know, your hamstring flexes your knee, your quadricep extends your knee, but then you start looking and saying, well, what happens when I run?
Yeah.
You know, is my leg extension coming from my quadricep? And it's like, no, it's actually coming from your glute, from your hamstring, from your quadricep. Even your calf is helping you because as you push off the ground, that's assisting in the extension of your leg.
Yeah.
And you start to see anatomy differently. And when you see anatomy differently, you can't not see anatomy differently and then not see training differently.
Mm.
Because you start to look at it. It was really funny. I went to this first Gary Gray course, and I think it was called When the Foot Hits the Ground. And basically, that was what the course was about. Like, okay, when you put your foot on the ground, what really happens? And I went back and I gave away my leg press, I gave away my leg extension, I gave away my leg curl. This was probably, I'm going to say 1993, 94-ish, somewhere in there, because I started to realize, well, none of these things matter. What matters is having somebody on that extremity and learning how to handle their body weight while they're on that extremity, not all these little isolated muscle actions that we've been trying to do. And then correspondingly, we started to have huge success rehab wise. I started getting athletes coming, you know, people saying, oh, this person's all done. This person will never play again. This person's finished. And we were getting these people healthy and they were going back to playing. And people were like, you know, well, what are you doing? And it's like, well, we're just kind of, we're applying common sense. You know, we're looking at what, you know, we're looking at what we used to think we knew about anatomy, and then now looking at what we really know about anatomy and realizing that there is this science of functional anatomy, and that functional anatomy and origin and insertion anatomy are not the same thing. But we all learned in school origin and insertion anatomy,
Mhm.
the very, you know, kind of sanitized. I always say if you were on a table and someone asked you to, you know, okay, so, you know, sit, legs hanging off the table, you know, tighten up your quad, what happens? Well, your leg extends,
Yeah.
right? I said, but when does that ever happen? You know, I always use, and I have the same kind of tired analogies. I always say it's like, you know, the only guy who does that is a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. Like nobody is ever going to extend their leg in that manner. Like it's just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
You know, and people would say, well, you know, what about maybe a punter in football? Like there might be like
They come up with that one off.
there's always one weird little exception. You think, yeah, maybe leg
There's one guy
extension
that raises his hand.
outside. Yeah, but in general, and that's when I started. Like I said, even bilateral training. What if you think about sports? There's only one bilateral sport:
Squatting, powerlifting,
rowing.
rowing,
Mm.
rowing. Oh
Rowing
wow.
is the only truly bilateral sport where someone is consistently producing force with both legs at the same time. There's nothing else. Then people say, "Oh, what about jumping in volleyball?" I'm like, "Ah, that's power. It's different. You know, there's going to be lateral movement, and even you know, it's not squatting. They're not going to jump. They're going to jump from a very, uh, you know, quarter squat kind of position. You just start thinking like, well, when does this squatting thing really happen? And you're kind of like, pretty much never, or maybe for rowers, but other than that, not very often. Even people, oh, what about football linemen? And I said, well, go talk to a good offensive line coach. Ask them about what, you know, what happens when they block somebody. It's all stepping. Like nobody is
Yeah.
pushing off with two legs,
Yeah.
right? It's all about like, you know, steps and coordinating hands and hips and feet. And I'm like, well, that sounds more like functional training to me than it does powerlifting, right? And
No.
so we logically went in the logical direction.
What year was that when you think that that whole functional? It's so funny.
It would have been early 2000s because that book came out in 2004,
It's
and I
so
took a ton
funny.
of shit for that.
The marketing guys called it functional training. You just called it smart training.
Right. I called it really the application of what I was learning about rehab to training. That's what I really thought it
And it
was.
took human kinetics to say, we're going to call it functional and we're going to
Yep.
market this functional and call it functional.
And I got stuck with that for life in terms of that was kind of like the,
You
and
100% did. Yeah.
then I ran with it. I started to think, well, why not? Right. I'm forever associated with this word. I can either accept it. And we started to put out, I remember when we did this first recorded seminar and I was like, what are we going to call it? And he was like, functional strength coach, right? And I was like, yeah, probably. That probably makes the most sense, right? And then we sold like 1 million copies of the
Was
seminar.
functionalstrengthcoach.com yours?
Um,
Was Functional Strength Coach? Was that Functional Strength
uh,
Coach?
strengthcoach.com is
Right.
mine.
I remember. How
I got,
early did you get strengthcoach.com to get strength? Like, was that right as the internet started? Strengthcoach.com is like, who
it
has?
actually started before that. It was sportspecific.com. It was Ryan Lee's. Ryan Lee had sportspecific.com.
Okay.
And basically, I partnered with him because he was losing interest in sportspecific.com.
Yeah.
And I had a non-paid, I had actually a website called michaelboyle.biz.
Okay. I
And
remember
we
that.
had like a Charlie Francis kind of forum on there and
Okay. Yeah.
become really active, but it was all non-paid. And after a while, I thought, oh, I need to figure out a way if I'm going to spend this much time doing this,
Yeah.
market it. So I went to Ryan and said, hey, your sports specific thing is dying. You're not interested in it anymore. And so we partnered, much like I had done initially with the For Peer thing, and we partnered on that. And then he said, oh, and by the way, he said, I actually own strengthcoach.com. He said, I think it would be better if it was strengthcoach.com than sportspecific.com.
Did you ever have any interaction with Charlie Francis?
No, it's funny. Someone asked me that the other day, and I said that was probably they said if you could have dinner with one person, I said it would be, in the industry, it would be Charlie Francis because I never did. I should have made a point because you don't think like, oh, these people are going to die and I won't have a chance
Yeah.
ever interact with them.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, it ended up in a situation where suddenly Charlie passes away and you think, wow, that one got away from me.
That got away. Yeah.
Got much better at making sure that I did kind of meet the people that I wanted to meet at the times that I wanted to meet them.
Yeah. I think
And
I agree with that with Charlie Francis. I don't think there's somebody that's impacted the industry stronger, but yet very few people have really met and interacted with.
yep, I would say the same. I mean,
Right.
but again, he wrote very, very early on, and that's what I started to look at people like that and realize the people that are being influential are the people that are writing, that people that are creating video content. And I wanted to be one of those people.
Mm-hmm.
So I started writing and creating, and I'd always written anyway, but I was writing more. I was writing articles, and that was when I started to realize the seminar thing. Like I'd made some actually at that time VHS tapes. So you talk about when this was,
I
but
had your foam rolling VHS tape.
yeah. So I'd done those for Perform Better, and
Great. Yeah, perform better. Yeah. Yeah.
then I saw one time. I still remember. I bought a seminar series. I forget who sold it or what it was, but I just remember getting. I got 7 DVDs or 7 VHS tapes. Actually, a package showed up about this thick, and it was all these VHS tapes. And I started putting them in my VCR and watching them, and I realized all they did. This is a seminar, and they just recorded it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why am I bothering to try to make? We were kind of putting a lot of effort into production at that time, Perform Better, because they had been doing track and field videos. So we were shooting them on a Sunday and getting models to come in and doing all this stuff. And then I thought, I can just do a seminar and record it and sell it like these guys did. And
I skipped a
that was
mel.
Functional Strength Coach 1. I went and we had a little auditorium at BU, and I got our hockey coach to let me use the auditorium. And I said, I'm going to sell enough tickets to pay for the guy to video it. And so that's what I did. I think I invited 30 people and charged them like $100 a piece. So I think I got, whatever, $3,000, which paid for the guy to video it. And then we sold that as Functional Strength Coach 1.
Isn't it crazy to see how content is different? Like I think I bought or had a video like the hip dominant, knee dominant.
Yeah.
And how people are changing how they create content. Like to talk to you about this podcast, I thought about this earlier. I sent you a message on Twitter. For me to have an interview with you, I would have had to write you a letter. I would have had to like, like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Oh yeah, I mean,
whether it's good
you
or
would have done
bad,
it actually.
yeah,
It,
whether it's good or bad, people have become more accessible. I don't know if that's good or bad
Mhm.
I
sometimes, right?
think it's good, honestly. And that's
Yeah.
the part I always say to people. I think the internet is good, but it's like everything. We have to figure out how to use it because it's made information sharing so much simpler. Like you said, I can remember I have a bunch of interviews transcribed in my computer where people would send me the questions and I'd write the answers and then they'd publish the answers on their blog. And that was how we did this before. I can remember Anthony Brown. I don't know what year it was when he started Strength Coach Podcast, but I remember he called me up on the phone and he said, I want to do a podcast. Do you want to do it with me? And I was like, yeah, what's a podcast? And
Yeah.
he goes, it's kind of like a radio show, kind of. And I was like, do you think anybody will listen to these things? And he was like, yeah, I think podcasting is going to be really big. I think this is something that we should do and we should kind of get ahead of it. And he started this whole Strength Coach podcast idea. And I think we've done 400 episodes or something like that.
Holy cow. Right? Isn't
Mhm.
that great? I mean,
And but I honestly, I when we started, I didn't even know what it was. But with a lot of these things, I didn't know. I can remember there's so many things um that you can recall over time, but I can remember seeing my first PowerPoint presentation. Now, and again, you guys are too young, but do you remember slide carousels?
no.
Okay.
Wait, yes, you dropped the little slide inside the
Yeah, you
turn.
dropped a little slide in, and you had a slide projector, and you had a little remote control, and your slides, literally like a PowerPoint slide, dropped into this, and the projector projected that individual slide up on the wall. So you had to put all your slides in order, and make sure they were right side up, and all that with all these things that you had to do. And then you brought this slide carousel with you, so it was a kind of cylindrical deck that had all these slides in it. And then you'd slap your thing on there and you'd get up to do your presentation and you'd click from slide to slide. And we thought that was pretty slick because
Yeah.
we actually had slides.
Yeah.
And and then I can remember I was at the NSCA and Boyd Epley's up there
Yeah.
and I'm watching and I'm sitting with somebody and I'm like, what the hell is going on? And this guy
Mhm.
next to me is like elbowing me. He's like, it's in his computer. And I'm like, what's in his computer? He's like, the whole thing is in his computer. He's doing it from his computer. I'm like, what the hell is he doing from his computer? I don't like, I was looking at the guy like, what are you talking about? And he's like, it's this thing, it's PowerPoint. He said his whole presentation is in the computer. And I was sitting there, I'm thinking, his presentation is in his computer? It was baffled my mind that somehow, like, I thought of a computer as like a word processor,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
That's basically the way that we looked at it.
Yeah.
And the idea that somehow now they were hooking up this, and I can remember then I saw Mike Clark, NASM Mike Clark, not strength
Yep.
coach Mike
Yep.
Clark.
Yep. Yep.
And he all of a sudden is doing a presentation and he's got video.
Inside the video.
Yes, in the computer. There's videos in the computer and the videos are running on the slide, which is on the screen.
Yeah.
And I am, like I said, I'm like watching somebody rub two sticks together and create fire, right? I'm just like, holy shit. Like he's got pictures in the computer. And I remember going up to him afterwards because he was really smart. He was younger than me, but smart.
I remember Mike.
And I was like, Mike, what's the deal? And he's like, oh, it's really simple. You just download the MPEGs onto your computer and then you put them into the PowerPoint slide. And I was like, oh, yeah, you download the MPEGs. I was like, I should have known that. And I'm like, what the fuck is an MPEG? Like, I have no idea what he's talking about right now. And I went back and I had this kid that was working with me who was pretty tech savvy at that time. And I went back and I explained to him what was going on. And he was like, "Yeah, we can take." He took all my old VHS stuff and he clipped it up into MPEGs. So I still have them all on my computer. So he took a lot of my original video was stuff we recorded with a camcorder,
Sure.
Mhm.
and he just somehow took it. I still don't know how he did it, but he
You
made it
have
up.
tons of content. I mean, you
Oh
have
yeah,
hours and hours of videos and instructionals and content and
yep.
content.
You have no idea how much stuff is in my computer, just video, just
Oh,
pure video.
I imagine.
But we
It,
started doing that. We started videoing, and then it was like video and everything. And then all of a sudden, you could video it on your iPhone, and then you could airdrop it. And it's like, and I just was a kind of an early tech adopter in terms of I just was always trying to figure out, okay, how can I make my presentations better? And I can make my presentations better by having a better understanding of the tech,
yeah.
a better understanding of how to use PowerPoint, a better understanding of these things, and then you combine that with presenting a lot, and you get like, okay, now I've presented a lot, so I'm pretty comfortable talking to people, and now I have the tech side of it down reasonably well, so I understand what I'm doing. And you end up in a situation where now you can really do some good quality education.
Yeah. We mentioned Charlie Francis. Is there anybody else? And we'll do this in closing because, like, I love one things I love about I love the history of the industry. I
Mhm.
love you talking about, like, yeah, it was 1984 and nobody else wanted to do it, so I was a strength coach, right? Like, I mean, it's so cool to see that. I'm one of the few guys I think still left around, at least in my age, and the younger guys aren't like this. Like, they forget about, like, the nostalgia of what it was before, what it came out of. The fact that, like, Boyd Epley was revolutionary for even having a strength coach in college. Like,
Right.
never heard of that. And he didn't meet. Has there ever been anybody else in this industry that you never got to meet? They're like, I wish I would have met that. Like, that guy really influenced me, and I didn't get to spend either enough time or I didn't ever get to meet him.
No, Charlie would be the big one, honestly,
But it,
because after that, I just started making sure, like, I would just go up and introduce myself to people.
yeah,
I still remember, I went to a Shirley Sarman seminar, who was a physical therapist who was had a huge influence on my thought process.
I
And
remember her. Yep.
little bit of a woman from St. Louis, not like probably 5 feet tall. And I went to one of her seminars, and I went right up and I said, Shirley, my name's Michael Boyle. I'm a strength coach. And she was like, I know you. She said, people come to my seminars all the time because of you. She said, I have no idea why. I don't have any idea why what I'm doing makes any sense to you, but thank you for having these people come. And I took, like, I don't take pictures with people very often. I took a picture with her
Yeah.
because I was like, hey, this is like a big deal for me.
Yeah.
And, but there weren't, I was lucky, I got to speak at a lot of places. And when I did, I made sure, like, I got to meet Johnny Parker. I got to meet actually Al Miller. I've never met Al Miller in
I'm Miller.
person.
Okay. Yeah.
Al Miller would be one that I would say I wish I've talked to him on the phone, but I've never met him in person.
Yeah.
But there aren't that many of those guys of that era
That you didn't meet.
that I didn't get to meet. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I met Bob Ward. I went down to the Dallas Cowboys when Bob Ward was the strength coach for the Cowboys before Mike Wojcik. And I still remember the NSCA, they had a tour of the Cowboys facilities. They did it in Dallas. They said you can go out to Thousand Oaks then, which was, I think, outside. Must have been outside. No, it couldn't have been Thousand Oaks because that was California. Or maybe we did go and the seminar was in California. I don't remember, but we went to their training area anyway. And I just was like, okay, I'm going to go meet Bob Ward because I'm not going to not meet Bob Ward. And I just was like, I was kind of a pushy kid, I think,
Yeah,
probably.
okay. And you're curious about it, and you're like, I got to meet these guys.
Yeah, and I just was like, you just realize that people, I called Mike Stone at the National Strength Research Center at Auburn when he was at Auburn. This goes back to, like, Rowdy Gaines in the early 80s. They were training swimmers down there. And I had a question, and I pulled the phone book out, and I, dialed information or whatever. And I said, I want the National Strength Research Center in Auburn, Alabama. And next thing I know, someone's answering the phone, and I said, is Dr. Stone there? And they said, yep. And I was like, I got a question. Could you ask him to come on to the phone? He came to the phone and answered Mike, and he can't stand me now because of the functional thing. Like, he'd
Yeah,
probably be thinking, I can't believe I answered that idiot's question.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I did that with Don Chu. I called his clinic in California one time. I read an NSCA article, and it was I still remember Ather Sports Injury Clinic, Castro Valley, California. Why I remember that, I don't know, but that's where Don worked. And I just called, and I got the number and said, is Don Chu available? And they said, well, he's with a patient. And I said, well, I'll wait. And 5 minutes later, he picked up the phone, and I told him who I was, which meant nothing to him, of course.
Yeah.
I'm a guy in Boston who just read your article and doesn't understand something. And he told me what I wanted to know, and thanked him and hung up. And then I went to a seminar, and I said, I just want to let you know I'm the kid who called you from Boston. And so now when I see, he remembers all the time. He's like, yeah, you were the
That's
kid
so
from Boston who used to call me.
That's so
It
cool.
is so cool.
I met Mel Sif at a seminar,
Oh,
and Mel Sif, and I was just kind of like, I almost didn't go, and I was like, that's incredible to meet someone like that. So
yeah.
So, hey, we really appreciate you coming on. We're kind of towards the end. I appreciate you answering the text and first and being willing to do it. Like, I kind of shot it out there when I messaged you, and I was like, yeah, what's he gonna say? No, right? I'm kind of like,
That's the
and you're like,
worst, yeah.
yeah, sure. And I'm like, dude, okay.
Oh, I like your, I mean, I honestly, I'll tell you the truth. I like your interaction on social
Okay.
media.
Well,
I
thank
think
you.
you're always pretty genuine and pretty polite. So when I see people like that who think, okay, I've got a podcast that I'm doing, I think, well, it would be nice to talk to this person for an hour and to get to know them a little bit better and
Hey,
to,
thank you.
because and it's just the same way or the reverse, I guess. If I look and think, hey, this person's a dink and I don't like the way they behave on
Yeah.
social media, I probably wouldn't answer it, or I'd just say, oh no, too busy, whatever.
Yeah.
But I've done a lot of these for people, and I have no idea. Most of the time, I don't ask them how many listeners they're going to have or what's going to happen. It's just more an opportunity
Well, I
to.
started it off by being like, "Hey, we don't have a big podcast, but I'd like an hour with you,
Yeah.
just to talk to you." Just and really, what I do love, I love the history of this industry. Like, I love hearing like '84 to then '96, and then he started the gym and like all the stuff that it took interact. Like, I love that stuff. Like, I love meeting the guys or the people that were like in the very beginning when they were doing stuff that nobody was doing it. They were speaking. Nobody was doing this kind of stuff. They were amateur bodybuilders at best, and they're the guys like that were like translating the Russian literature because they wanted to learn about plyometrics because we didn't know anything about, what I'm saying? Like, that stuff's cool to
Hmm.
me.
And I'm the same way. I love it. I'm the same way. It's funny because I'm in the process of writing kind of the script for Functional Strength Coach 8, and that's one of the first things I talk about is history. And I started out with there's a slide of Sam Cooke singing "Wonderful World,"
Yeah.
which is the song "Don't Know Much About History," and I said, so I'm going to just lead in with the Sam Cooke intro because most people have and it's when people argue with you and don't realize why. Like I always look at people and think the reason I have the feelings that I do is because of the experiences that I had. And if you didn't have the same experiences that I did, then you wouldn't have the same feelings that I did. So, like for us, I mean, I can remember, imagine our linemen used to have to run the mile-and-a-half run. Our linemen.
Makes no sense, right?
Makes no sense. Under 12 minutes. They had to run a mile and a half under 12 minutes. Cooper test.
The Cooper
And
test. I was just going to ask.
and then people say, oh, 300 yard, 300 shuttles non-specific, or 110s is non-specific. And I'm like, do you know where we're coming? Like the 110, the 16 110 test came out of Bill Ferran, who was the Miami Heat strength coach for maybe 30 years, but Bill was then at University of Miami, and he wanted Jimmy Johnson, who was then the University of Miami coach, to stop doing the mile-and-a-half test.
So he came up with the 16 110s.
16 110s, which is a mile of 110s, right?
I never, in my years, I've never realized that that's
why he did it.
is a mile.
Yeah.
Wow, I feel
Right.
like you just
1,760 yards.
I
So
feel like you just showed me, you just rubbed two sticks together and the light came on. I've never realized that the 16, how many people do you think who work in this industry know that the 16 110s was the mile replacement?
yeah, probably none, and
None.
and not enough of them would know who Bill Ferran even was, and that it was Bill's idea, or that Bill worked for Jimmy Johnson at University of Miami. You know what I mean? Like people, again, they don't have they have no conception of history. And that's why, so I let in, the whole idea that, those who don't know history are destined to repeat it, right? You're going to make the same mistakes over and over again, and you're going to make the mistakes because you don't know history. If you knew history, you wouldn't repeat that error. And that's why sometimes now I look at people and think like, my God, we're back to this. Like when I look at people,
Oh, I do. Mike, I've done that.
leg extensions are suddenly back, and I'm
Yeah.
like, leg
Like
extensions.
here we are, we're back. Like I feel like we're like one step away from somebody putting monoliths on the platforms again. You're like, you know what I'm saying? Like
But
I feel like we're one step
look at
away.
Instagram, body part workouts. Like I couldn't believe, my son is 20. So when he's first, like he's in high school a couple of years ago, and his friends are talking about like, oh, I did back today at the gym. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
did back? I'm like, you did what?
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, I did back today. I usually do chest. And I'm just like, what are you doing? Like, who the hell told you? And then I realized that there's this whole Instagram world out there where they're watching these
Hmm.
buffoons on Instagram
Yeah.
who are.
That's totally how I started. It's like it's body part specific. It's all over Instagram.
I couldn't. I had no idea. Like I did not think. I thought that was gone.
Yeah.
And I
But
said,
that's like, I
it's
think that's the
smarter than
cool
that.
thing. the cool thing is like the depth of it now. It's like that started as like such a vain thing. It's like, I just want my back to look good. I just want my chest to look good. And then as you get further into your strength training, you're like, I want to move in a cool way. Like I
Yeah.
want to make sure that yeah, like I want to be able to move in a cool way and challenge my body to do something wild or different or whatever. I don't care about how big my back is
You should go
anymore.
back. I wrote an article called Evolution of a Strength Coach, and that's basically that was the whole idea. I said, you start
Yeah.
out as a bodybuilder because you want to look good.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Then you realize that people make fun of bodybuilders because they're weak, and then you become
Yep.
a powerlifter because you want to be strong. And you're
Mhm.
like, oh, I don't just want to look good. I want to be strong. I want people to respect me because of the weights that I move in the weight room. I said, and then you become the injured powerlifter because you start getting hurt because you don't know what the hell you're doing. I said, and then you become the functional training guy because you're trying to figure out your way around all these
Being
injuries you
injured.
caused yourself
Yeah,
during your little evolutionary process of
I describes most people as they go through life, right?
totally.
Mike, I really
Totally.
appreciate you coming on, man.
no
That was
problem.
awesome.
I'm glad
Pleasure.
you did it. And
It was nice to meet you. You were an added bonus. I didn't know you were going to be here, so that's nice.
we're good. It's us. We do them all together. We do them all together.
Yeah.
I
Josh
really
knows that I wish I could have had like I wish I was exposed to strength training a lot sooner than I was. It just was never I kind of did it in high school with my team, but like if I could go back and I could exist in like a meathead gym growing up, if my dad ever did that, like that'd be so cool. I wish I existed in that time.
I appreciate your time, Mike. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much,
I'm
Mike.
out of here. See you.